All right, let's take a break from the race state for now and switch back to the lobby state. Next up, we are going to set up a way to store the player's best score and add functionality to fetch and display it on the lobby screen. We will start by designing the UI. So open Starling Builder and load the lobby UI layout. Then select the main layout and add a new text field to it. Let's name it as Best Score Text. Let's format the text field accordingly. Let's arrange it properly within the main layout. Now let's save the changes and get back to VS Code. Straight away, let's declare the public variable best score text. Now, the thing about best score is that it should be persistent. That is, it must outlive an application restart, which typically means we have to write the respective score value into a file on the disk. For that, we are going to use ActionScript's shared object. Since we will require to access this best score from both the lobby and the race state, let's declare it inside the game class. So here's what we need to do. First, declare an integer variable to hold the best score value. And then, declare a shared object variable to store and retrieve this value. Let's name it as best score. And let's add getter and setter for it. Now, let's create the shared object variable and instantiate it in the constructor by using the getLocal function of the shared object class. A local shared object is identified by a simple string. In our case, it's TurboShift data. Now, in the getter function of best score, let's replace this line with the following code. What it does is, it checks if the best score value stored in the shared object is null or not. If it's null, then return 0. Otherwise, return the value as an integer. And in the setter function, let's store the best score value in the shared object variable by using its setProperty function. We can also call its flush function to immediately write it to a local file. Just think of shared object as a persistent dictionary object. Now, in the race state, when the collision happens, let's check. If the current score value is greater than the best score value. If yes, then replace the best score value with the current score value, which will be saved in the shared object immediately. Let's add a trace statement here. And now in the lobby state, all we have to do is assign the best score's value to the best score text field's text as a string. Let's test it. Oops, it should have been best score 70. Let's fix it by adding the string best score before the value. Let's test again. Look, it's displaying correctly here. Let's see if it's updating the score properly or not. Cool. Everything is working as expected. Next, we're going to create a simple leaderboard and display the player's best score in it. Just a heads up, we won't be covering any backend services or database setup in this tutorial. Instead, we'll be using dummy data to simulate the leaderboard. All right, so let's get started. In Starling Builder, we already have the lobby layout open. Now, let's create a new layout to place the leaderboard icon. First, select the root layout and add a new layout inside it. Rename this one to bottom right layout. And set the layout data as bottom 5 and right 5. Next, let's add the leaderboard icon from the Asset tab inside the bottom right layout. Just make sure it's set to type button, not image. Rename it by prefixing an underscore and change its name to Leaderboard Button. Now go ahead and save the layout, and let's switch back to VS Code. Back in the lobby state, let's declare a public variable to bind the Leaderboard button. Then, inside the constructor, add an event listener for it. This is where we'll handle the click and display the leaderboard. Let's do a quick test and see if the leaderboard button shows up on the lobby screen. Perfect. Just as expected. Now let's move on and create the leaderboard pop-up. Let's open Starling Builder and create a new layout. Now, most of the steps are going to be just like what we did in the earlier layouts, so I won't be repeating them. You should be able to follow along just fine. Let's go ahead and save the layout. So everything we have done so far is quite similar to how we designed the game over pop-up. But from here on, things are going to be a bit different. Now, it's a leaderboard, right? Which means it should display a scrollable list of items that show player details, like their rank, name, and score. Yeah, we haven't designed the item itself yet, but let's set that aside for now and just focus on the list. Thanks to Feathers UI, we don't have to build the scrollable list from scratch. There's already a built-in component called List that does exactly what we need. Head over to the Feathers tab and select feathers.controls.list. Now let's give it an explicit size. For 50 by 500 should be fine. Let's position it to the center and save the layout. Now, we're getting this error because the list component is using a background skin, which is not from our texture atlas. As mentioned earlier, the Starling Builder editor is built entirely with Feathers UI, and by default, it uses a theme called Metalworks Mobile. So, most Feathers UI components come pre-skinned with that theme. That's why you might have noticed the list component already has a background skin that matches the editor. Now, to fix this issue, all we need to do is remove that default background skin and apply a new texture from the texture atlas. But what if you want to use a theme in your app as well? Well, in that case, you'll need to modify the default template used by Starling Builder and remove any conflicting properties. For the list component, you just need to remove the background skin property, since it's not needed when you're using a skin from the theme. You can also embed your own custom theme inside Starling Builder and design UI layouts with it. Unfortunately, I won't be able to walk you through that in this tutorial. If you're interested, you can always learn more about it on the Starling Builder website. So, let's apply a background skin to the list. Save the layout and let's get back to VS Code. Let's create a new class for our leaderboard pop-up. Let's copy a few code chunks from the Game Over pop-up class. That should help us set up the basic structure for the leaderboard pop-up. And don't forget to add the new layout in the Asset Manager. Now, back in the lobby state, let's declare an instance for the leaderboard pop-up. And instantiate it right here. We will be using the pop-up manager to show it on the stage, just like we did with the Game Over pop-up. Now, the Game Over pop-up didn't have a close button, but this one does. So, let's add a variable for the close button in the leaderboard pop-up class. Then, add an event listener for it, so when the player taps the close button, the pop-up will be removed from the screen. Before we test it, there's one thing to keep in mind. We also need to bind the list component to this class, otherwise it's going to throw an error. So, let's add a public variable for that as well. All right, let's test the pop-up first. Looks good, but we need to add an overlay to make it stand out from the background. Open Starling Builder, and for the root layout, let's add a background skin using a quad. Set the color to black, and its alpha to 0.6. Save the layout. Hang on, did we add this overlay to the Game Over pop-up earlier? Let's check it once. Nope, there isn't one. We need to add one there too. This one's a bit too dark, let's lower the alpha. Let's start by adding the overlay to the Game Over pop-up. .3 should be fine. Let's make the same change here as well. Save the layout. Yep, now it looks good. And this one looks good too. Next, let's work on the list component for the Leaderboard pop-up. Wait, we haven't designed the item yet. Let's do that first. Back in Starling Builder, create a new layout. Let's set the root layout size to 400 by 80. Now let's add 3 text fields. The first one will display the leaderboard rank, the second one the player name, and the third one the score. So let's name each one accordingly. Now let's format each text field and give them different colors. Now let's arrange these text fields neatly inside the layout. Please note that this step we're doing just for aligning and spacing. Now we can safely remove the layout, not required anymore. Now, let's add a background skin to the root layout. Now that we've added the background skin, we need to slightly shift the alignment within the layout. Let's do that. And save the layout. Next, let's load the leaderboard layout and take a quick look. Now, you probably want to see how the item we just designed fits into the pop-up, right? So to do that, we need to load the leaderboard item layout inside the leaderboard layout. To load a layout, just click the external button up here and select the leaderboard item's JSON file. Let's duplicate the item a few times to see how the list will look when filled. Now, when designing layouts, we might sometimes need to use placeholders or dummy items just to get a sense of the UI and how it looks. But we don't want them included in the final UI because we know we'll be handling those parts differently. In such cases, we simply need to tell the Starling Builder engine to ignore those items when building the final UI. To do that, first, select the item. Then, click on the Custom tab here and enable the For Editor checkbox. Now, repeat the same steps for each of these items. That's it. These elements will remain in the layout file, but won't be included when the leaderboard pop-up is finally created. Now save the layout, and let's get back to VS Code. Let's first add the leaderboard item layout in the Asset Manager. Next, let's create a new class for it. We named the class as Leaderboard Item Renderer because it's going to extend an item renderer class from the Feathers UI library called Layout Group List Item Renderer. Now, if you want to learn more about item renderers, I highly recommend checking out Feathers UI's documentation page. Unfortunately, I won't be covering it in this tutorial, but their docs are well written and explain everything clearly. Back in VS Code. Let's now declare the public variables for binding with the 3 text fields. Now let's rename them properly. For this class, we won't be using the constructor function, so let's remove it. And instead, let's override a protected function called initialize. Let's declare a variable for the main sprite. Inside the initialize function, let's first call its superclass's initialize function. Next, let's copy the code from here and paste it here. Rename it to leaderboard_item. Now, here in the create function, there's a Boolean parameter called trim leading space. This tells the engine to trim off any unused space within the layout. That is, the area the root layout is not covering. For all our previous layouts, we left it as false, since their root layouts matched the canvas size exactly. But in this case, the root layout of the leaderboard item is not using the full canvas size. So we need to set trim leading space to true so that only the actual content area is used and not the empty surrounding space. Next, we need to override another function called commit data. Inside it, we are going to check if the data property is not null, then set the text field's text using the data, like. Now you might be wondering, how is it going to get its data, right? Don't worry, that's exactly what we're going to cover next. Let's go to the leaderboard pop-up class. And in the constructor function, let's assign a factory function to the list component. For that, let's use lists, item renderer factory property, to which we are going to assign a function which will return an item renderer. That is, we're essentially telling the list, instead of creating generic item renderers, use our custom factory, which will give you an instance of leaderboard item renderer for each item. Next, we need some data to display in our list. As I mentioned earlier, we will be using dummy data to simulate a leaderboard. So let's go ahead and declare a private array called leaderboard for storing dummy data. Please note that each entry in the leaderboard array is an object containing a player's name and their best score. For the rest of the entries, I'm just gonna copy-paste so that we can save some time. Next, in the constructor function, we need to set the data provider property of our list component. Since the leaderboard data is based on an array, we're going to set it as a new instance of array collection. Now, we need to add the leaderboard data onto our list's data provider. Let me again copy-paste that portion of the code just to save time. So we are using a for loop to iterate the leaderboard array. First, we are assigning each entry to a local variable, player, of type object. Then, we're adding each player to the list's data provider using the addItem method. But please note that we're not just adding the raw player object, we're actually creating a new object with 3 properties: rank, name, and score. The rank is calculated as i+1 because array indices start at 0. But we want our leaderboard to show ranks starting from 1. We're also pulling the name and score from the original player data. So that's it. Our leaderboard pop-up should be ready by now. Let's test and find out how it looks. Oops, seems like we gave the wrong layout name. Oh, it should have been leaderboard_item_UI. Let's test again. What? We have not set any layout to horizontal layout. Then why this error? I think we forgot to remove the layout from the root layout after aligning its children. Just set it to null and save the layout. And test again. Okay, this time everything worked, but alignments are totally messed up. First, we need to align the list itself, and then we might have to add back the horizontal layout we just removed from the leaderboard item. Let's first fix the list's layout. It already has a layout, which is vertical layout. Let's just check how it's aligned. Yeah, let's change its horizontal alignment from justify to center. Let's also set a gap of 5 and a padding of 15. Save the layout. Next, like I said earlier, let's go ahead and add the horizontal layout back to the leaderboard item. Save the layout. Also, just to be safe, let's add both the layouts here in the linkers array. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, we can now safely remove these two, as we've already declared few variables of their types. Oh, and not sure if you've noticed, but it's been a while that Starling's been reminding us to add depth and stencil to the application descriptor. Seems like our list component actually needs full mask support. So yeah, let's add that in the application descriptor and make sure it's enabled. Just add true to enable it. And let's test it. The alignment issues are now fixed, and the pop-up looks really good. But there are a couple of problems. The leaderboard isn't sorted by score, and we forgot to add our best score in it. Right now, it's all dummy data, so let's go back and sort these out. Inside the leaderboard pop-up class. First, let's push our best score into the leaderboard array. For name, let's use you. And we can fetch the best score from the root class. Next, we need to sort the leaderboard. Again, I am going to copy-paste that portion of the code. Now, you must be already familiar with the array's sort function. It simply compares two objects at a time, A and B. If A has a higher score, it returns -1 to put A first. If A has a lower score, it returns 1 to put B first. Equal scores return 0, which means no change in their position. Since it returns -1 for higher scores, this sorts our leaderboard from highest to lowest, perfect for our leaderboard ranking. Now let's test and see the changes. So the leaderboard is now sorted, and we can also see our score in it. But the UI/UX designer in me somehow wants our score to stand out from the rest of the players. Hold that thought for a moment. Also, I can see a higher draw count here, which is not good. But let's leave that for now and take care of it later. So let's go ahead and make that UI/UX change for our score. So what we are going to do is, here in the commit data function, we will simply check. If the player name is you, then change the font color of both the names and scores text fields. Let's change the name text field's font color to red and the score text field's font color to lime. That's it. Let's now test and see it in action. There you go. Now our score stands out from the rest. Now let's play one round and see if our best score is getting updated properly in the leaderboard. Uh-oh, just missed it by 10 points. You know what? Let's not waste time. Instead, let's cheat. So, instead of 10 points, now we will get 100 points per enemy car. Let's test. So, our current best score is 150, and we are at rank 7. So, our best score is now 300. and our rank in the leaderboard got upgraded to 6. So yes, everything is working as expected. So that's it. We have completed the leaderboard implementation for this game. Next, we are going to work on the settings drop-down in the lobby state. In Starling Builder, load the lobby UI layout. So first, let's add the settings button in the top right corner. For that, let's use a layout group. And name it top right layout. Inside it, let's add the settings icon. Align the layout to top right. Rename it to Settings button. And let's straight away add it to the lobby state. Here, we need to display the settings dropdown. Back to Starling Builder. Inside the top right layout, let's add a sprite. And inside it, let's add a layout group. This layout group will contain all the buttons of the settings dropdown. Inside the buttons layout, let's add a sprite. And name it BGM Sprite. Inside it, we need to add 2 images. So let's first change this option to image. And add BGM icon and band icon. Now let's duplicate this sprite. And rename it to SFX Sprite. Now, let's change the texture of the BGM icon of SFX Sprite to SFX Icon. We need to add one more button to Buttons layout, which will be an actual button. So let's change this back to Button, and select the info icon. Now, let's arrange the buttons layout. Next, we need to add the slider image into the sprite. First, let's change this back to image, and select the slider. Let's apply the Scale 9 grid to it. Now let's resize it accordingly. We also need to resize the button layout. Let's change the vertical alignment to bottom. So, all the 3 buttons are now ready. Let's rename the sprite to Settings Dropdown. So, when the lobby is loaded, the Settings dropdown will be off-screen. And when the player clicks the Settings button, it will slide down to this position. That is, the Settings dropdown's Y position will be at 70. So, which means, initially its Y position should be at -270 to make it off-screen. Let's note that and keep it on screen at 70. Let's save the layout and get back to VS Code. First, let's declare the public variable for the settings dropdown. And in the constructor function, let's set its Y position to -270. Next, inside the onSettings triggered function, we'll tween the settings drop-down so it smoothly slides down. But before we can test that, we need to declare all the public variables needed for binding. There is BGM sprite, then SFX sprite, and, oh, let's rename it to info button. And declare its public variable in the lobby state. Before declaring variables for BGM sprite and SFX sprite, first, we need to create a separate class for them. Let's name it button sprite. It will extend a sprite class. In the constructor function, we are going to set this.touchGroup to true. That's because we want this class to behave as a single touchable object. So any touch event will target the container itself and not the children inside it. So our button sprite has two children, BGM icon and band icon. And we need access to its band icon image. So first, let's create a private variable to store its reference. And then in constructor, we can use getChild by name to access the child object named band icon. We know it's an image, so let's cast it as one. Next, we need to declare a public Boolean property called disabled. Let's generate its getter and setter functions. Now, we want the band icon to be visible based on the disabled properties value. So let's set band icon.visible equals disabled. Or, instead of setting its value in the constructor, we can set it in the disabled properties setter function like this. And remove this from here. Oops, I totally forgot. This class is supposed to be a custom component class, right? So we should have implemented it with the iCustom component interface. Sorry, my mistake. Let's fix it. And instead of the constructor function, we must use the init component function. Now, in the Starling Builder, for both BGM sprite and SFX sprite, let's set their custom component class as button sprite. Save the layout, and back to VS Code. Now, in the lobby state, let's declare two public variables of type button sprite, and name them as BGM sprite and SFX sprite. Everything looks good. So let's test it. The drop-down worked, but it doesn't look good, right? How about if we add a masking effect to it? Yeah, let's try that and see how it looks. Back to Starling Builder. Now, select top right layout and add a new sprite into it. Select the sprite, and in the Properties window, click on the Edit button next to the Mask property. For masking, let's simply use a quad. Now, we need to give it a size, which should match the settings dropdown. So let's give it a width of 70, and a height of 300, which is a little longer than the settings dropdown's height. Now, just drag and drop the settings dropdown into the mask sprite. And we can already see the masking effect here. Oh, the mask is placed a little higher. We should bring it down a little bit. It should be placed somewhere here, at the center of the settings button. Let's keep this here, just for reference. Now, select the sprite and let's edit the mask one more time. Let's change its Y value and see how it looks. 30 looks perfect. It cuts right at the center of the settings button. Now, just change the Y value of the settings drop-down and we can see it disappearing behind the settings button. Save the layout and let's test the build. Now it looks good. So let's go ahead and implement the full functionality. Let's reduce the Y value here to 50. Let's also resize the settings button's width to match the width of the drop-down. Here, I'm going to add an onComplete function, which will set up an event listener for touch events on the stage. Now, let's add the event listener. And generate an event listener for on-touch stage event. Next, let's copy this portion of the code and paste it here. We need to import the missing classes. Inside this if condition, we're going to check the names of the display objects being touched by the user. To test that, let's first use a trace statement and see how the object names are being displayed. Let's test. Oops, we got an error. Oh, instead of importing the class, we generated a local variable. My bad. So let's remove this line and import the correct class instead. Now, as we touch each display object on the lobby screen, its name is printed in the debug console. The reason we're getting BGM sprite and SFX sprite as the names of the display objects is because, in the button sprite class, we've set the touch group property to true. If this property were disabled, we'd be getting the name of the band image instead for both. Let's test that and see the result. See, it's showing as band image. That's because in the button sprite class, the band image sits at the top of the display hierarchy and is receiving the touch event. And that would make it difficult for us to identify which button sprite was actually touched by the user. So let's go back and enable the touch group variable. So let's add an if condition to check the target object's name. If it's BGM sprite, we will toggle its disabled property. Next, we will check for SFX sprite and do the same toggling for its disabled property. Please note that we only need to handle these two names, and for any other target, we will simply remove the settings drop-down from the screen. To do that, let's first create a new function called Remove Settings Dropdown. Inside it, let's use a tween function to remove it from the screen. Remember, earlier we used a tween function to display it. Let's copy this code and change its Y value to -250 so that the settings dropdown moves back up. We don't need the onComplete part, so let's remove it. We should also remove the touch event listener as it's no longer required. Let's copy this and change it to Remove Event Listener. Let's change the tween duration to 0.1 second. And let's call this function here in the else condition. So now when we touch BGM Sprite or SFX Sprite, it should toggle its state. And if we touch anything else, then the drop-down should be removed. Let's test that and see how it works. See, both the BGM Sprite and SFX Sprite are toggling as expected, and when we touch the info button, it's gone. Oh, something is wrong. Seems like there's an issue with the tween. Let's fix it. Yeah, when we click the settings button, the drop-down should only tween if it's not already visible. For that, first, we need to come down here and add an onComplete function to this tween. And inside it, set the visible property of the settings drop-down to false. Let's copy this line, and in the onSettings triggered function, let's add a condition to check if the settings drop-down's visibility is false. And it should only tween if its visibility is false, which means we actually don't require this function. Instead, let's convert it into an inline function. Or, even better, we can actually call addEventListener directly. We don't need the inline function. So, on complete, we will call addEventListener and pass these as arguments. Now, let's set the settings drop-down's visible property to false in the constructor. And we should set it to true before tweening. That's it. Now let's test. There you go. Looking cool, right? Next, we are going to add audio files to our project. I am going to copy all these files and add it to the Assets folder. First, let's create a new folder here. Let's name it as Sounds. Open it and paste it here. Back in VS Code, we now need to add all those sound files into our Asset Manager one by one. Just make sure their paths and names are accurate. Now, to play a sound, all we need to do is copy the file name, for example, Big Explosion. Then, so, this is where the collision takes place and the Big Explosion effect plays. So, let's go to the Big Explosion class. And in its play function, we'll call the playSound method of the Asset Manager class and pass the file name as a string. Here in the debug console, we can check if all the sounds were added to the Asset Manager. Let's test it one more time. I forgot to mention, for this project, we'll be using a different library to manage all the audio files. Here, I'm just giving a demo of how we can easily manage sounds using the Asset Manager class. Next, let's see how we can play a sound in a loop. Let's take Game Loop as the example. Let's start playing the sound as soon as the lobby loads. To play a sound in a loop, all we need to do is specify the loop count. Here, I'm using a number like 999. Let's test that and see how it sounds. We now have two sound instances playing the same loop. That's a bug. Let's change this back to 10. Next, let's add the SoundsAS library to our project for better management of audio files. SoundsAS is a popular ActionScript 3 audio library that extends Flash's native sound capabilities. It provides advanced features like seamless looping, volume fading, sound grouping, and better playback control. Let's download it and unzip it to a folder. Inside the source folder, there is a folder named Tree for Truss. Copy it and open our project folder. Then open the code folder and paste inside it. We need to add one more file from the SoundsAS folder. That's because SoundsAS uses an external library called AS3 Signals for event handling. Open the libs folder and copy this file. Then, in our project folder, this time, open the libs folder and paste inside it. That's it. Let's get back to VS Code. In the game class, let's first declare two variables of type Sound Manager. BGM Player will manage the game loop audio, and SFX Player will manage all the sound effects. Let's generate a getter for both the sound managers. Now, let's initialize both the variables in the constructor. Next, we need to load the audio files in the sound manager respectively. Before that, we can remove all these audio files from the asset manager. Let's load the sound game loop in BGM Player using the load sound method. Just mention the file path. We also have to specify a name for the loaded file. I'm going to keep it the same as the file name. Next, let's load a sound effect. For that, let's use the SFX Player to load the sound. Button click. Now, to play the BGM sound, let's go to the change state function. And here, use the play loop method of the BGM Player. Then, specify the sound name. I have set its volume to 0 because I want the BGM to fade in when the lobby loads. For that, first we have to get the sound from BGM Player. Just use getSound method. Then use the fade from method. We want the sound to go from 0 to 1 in just 3 seconds, or 3,000 milliseconds, and 1 being the maximum volume. Similarly, we can use the SFX Player to play the button click sound effect. For sound effects, we should use the playEffects method of the SFX Player. Let's use the same code for all the buttons in the lobby class. Now, let's test it. In game development, we generally have two types of sounds. One is the global sounds, which play continuously throughout the game, such as looping background music or sound effects like button clicks. And the other one is state-specific sounds, which are unique to certain states or levels. The two sound managers we just created, belong to the game class, which can be accessed from both the lobby state and the race state. However, our race state requires state-specific sounds, which are used only within the race state, which means we need a separate sound manager for the race state, which will load all the state-specific sounds when the state loads and unload them when no longer necessary. This approach helps us with memory management. That is, by not loading all sounds globally, we can save memory and improve the performance of our game. So, in the race state, let's declare a private variable, audio player of type sound manager, and instantiate it in the constructor. Next, let's load all the sounds required for the race state. Now, when the race starts, the car loop sound should start playing immediately. We will again apply the fade-in effect here. And when the collision takes place, it should fade out and pause the sound. To pause the sound on fade out, we have to add a listener for on-sound completed event, like this. And inside the function, just call audio player pause car loop. Next, let's add the big explosion sound effect. Let's add a sound effect for lane change as well. The new high score sound effect we will add later. Alright, so let's test now. Let's add the button click sound effect to the Game Over pop-up as well. Next, let's add the new high score sound effect. But for that, first we need to declare a Boolean variable. Let's name it new high score. And set it to false when the race starts. Now, in the update score function, we need to check if new high score value is false and current score value is greater than the best score. Then, set new high score to true and play the new high score sound effect. Now, to test this, we need to reset the best score value stored in the shared object. The easiest way to reset it is to give the shared object a new path. Now, let's test. You can see here, the best score is currently set to 0. And when we score our first point, it played. Let's test it one more time. This time, it should play the sound effect when we get a score of 60. There you go. Next, let's implement the mute buttons for BGM and SFX. First, let's create two Boolean variables. These flags, BGM_muted and SFX_muted, will hold the current muted states of the background music and sound effects. Next, let's create getter and setter methods for both. Please note that we will store their values in the shared object, so the player's preferences are saved. So let's update the getter and setter methods accordingly. In the setter, we will set the BGM player mute value directly. And save it in the shared object. Now let's do the same for sfx_muted. Renaming it to sfxPlayer. Next, we need to set the mute value for both players. In the lobby state, when the player touches the BGM sprite, the BGM_muted value should toggle. Similarly, touching the SFX sprite will toggle the sfx_muted value. Also, when the lobby loads, we need to set the BGM sprites and SFX sprites disabled property accordingly. That's it. Now let's test. Let's mute the BGM. SFX is still on. That's why we are able to hear the button click sound. Now let's mute SFX. See, we haven't set the mute value for the race state sound manager yet. So, in the race state, all we need to do is set the audio player's mute value equal to the sfx_muted value. Let's test again. See, the BGM and SFX are muted. That's because the app retrieved their values from the shared object, which were saved from the previous session. I don't want the game loop BGM to be this loud during the race. So, when the race starts, let's lower the volume of the game loop to 0.5. And when the Game Over pop-up appears, it should rise back to 1. Let's test again. It faded out. And it faded in. Let's test that one more time. Let's also add the button click sound effect to the Leaderboard pop-ups closed button. Let's test that one last time. So that's it. We have successfully implemented sound in our game. Next, we will work on creating a localization pop-up and adding localization support to our game. Let's open Starling Builder and create a new layout. By now, you should be familiar with Starling Builder and pop-up design, and there's nothing new in this pop-up that we haven't done before, so you can simply watch and follow along. Let's name this layout languages_UI. That's it. Our Select Language pop-up is now ready. And let's get back to VS Code. We need to create a new class. Let's name it Language Pop-up. This class will be similar to our Leaderboard pop-up class, so let's copy a few lines of code from it. Just make sure we import the right class. Here, we need to mention the layout name. That is languages_UI. Also, we forgot to add the layout into the Asset Manager. Let's do that now. Now, in the lobby state, let's add an event listener for the info button. We need to declare an instance for the language pop-up. And instantiate it here. Then, use the pop-up manager to display the pop-up. Let's also add the button click sound effect to the info button. Let's test and see how the pop-up looks. Oops, there's an error. Oh, we forgot to add the main layout property to the language pop-up class. Let's do that now. Let's test again. Yeah, everything looks good. Let's implement the close button functionality. Next, we need to add an event listener for the main layout. It's a touch event listener. So, let's copy this portion of the code from the lobby state and paste it here. Now, if we check the main layout, we can see that it only contains 3 buttons. And each time a user interacts with the main layout, we need to know the name of the button that received the touch. Since main layout only contains buttons, we can confidently declare a local variable of type button, cast the even target as button, and assign it to it. To test this, let's trace the button's name. And you can see the button names being printed as we click them. Before we proceed any further, let's first set up the JSON file that will hold our localization data. Inside the Assets folder, there should already be a folder named Localization. Inside it, let's create a new file. Please note, We must name this file strings, and its extension must be .json. If the name or extension is different, the Starling Builder editor will not support it. Let's start by adding curly braces. These curly braces represent an empty JSON object, and all our localized texts will go inside it. Next, let's check which texts in our game need to be localized. Open Starling Builder and load the lobby layout. For our first example, let's pick the Start button. So let's consider the word Start. First, let's create a key called text_01, and its value will be an object that holds different translations. Inside it, we'll use keys like EN for English, FR for French, and DE for German. Each of these keys should have the localized text as their value. So let's add the translations for French and German. The good thing about the Starling Builder editor is that it supports localization out of the box. That is, it automatically reads the strings.json file from the localization folder and gives us the option to preview the localized texts directly inside the editor. Load the lobby layout. Then select the Start button and go to the Custom tab here. At the bottom, you'll find a field called Localize Key. Click on it and then select text_01. Immediately, you can see the change. It's currently showing the German version. That's because in the localization menu, the language keys are alphabetically sorted. To change the language, just select another one from the list. There is a character missing here. That's because we have not included it in our bitmap font. No worries, we will fix that later. Next, let's take the best score text. This one is a text field, so let's remove the number part from it. Save the layout and close the editor. I have already prepared its localized version, so I will just copy and paste it here. And its key will be text_02. Now let's open the Starling Builder again. Load the lobby layout. And select the best score text field. Then update its localized key to text_02. Save the layout. The rest of the texts are already converted, so I will copy and paste all of them into our JSON file. So in total, we have 14 texts in the game that support localization. Let's go through each one in Starling Builder and assign the correct localized key. Remember, changes made to the JSON file will only reflect after restarting the editor. The lobby layout only contains 2 texts that need localization. So let's move on to the next layout. This one has 4 texts. Let's assign their localization keys one by one. First, select the header text. Oh, we haven't named it yet. Let's rename it to header text. Wait, I forgot which key this one uses. Let's check it quickly. Yes, it should be text_05. You might have noticed, all the keys from the JSON file are populated in a drop-down under the localized key field. Next, we have the 3 buttons. Their keys are text_06, 07, and 08 in that order. This text field needs a bit of resizing to fit the localized text properly. And never forget to save the layout. This one doesn't have any text to localize. The next one has the header text, and its key should be text_09. The race layout has a single text. And the key for that is text_10. Next is the Game Over pop-up, and it contains 4 texts. That's it. We have now mapped all 14 localized keys to the text in the game. Now let's switch back to VS Code. And the first thing we need to do here is add the strings.json file to our asset manager. Just make sure the path to the file is mentioned correctly. Next, we need to declare a variable that will hold the current device's language key. Let's name it locale of type string. Next, let's generate its getter and setter. When the app loads, we want this locale variable to store the default device language code. To achieve that, in the getter function, let's use a utility class called capabilities. This class provides information about the device capabilities where our Flash application is running. The capabilities class has a property called language, which gives us the default device language code. If you haven't worked with app localization before, you might find this workflow a little unnecessary. But trust me, it will make perfect sense once we fully implement it. Next, let's declare a variable for localization. Let's name it localization. Set its type as iLocalization, which is an interface for localizing display objects, both in the Starling Builder editor and here in the project. Let's initialize it in the onComplete function of the asset manager because we need to fetch the string.json file from the asset manager. Also, note that we need to initialize it using the default localization class, which implements iLocalization. And into its constructor function, we need to pass 2 parameters. The first one is the JSON file, and we need to pass it as a JSON object. And the other one is our locale variable, which holds the default device language code. So, to pass strings.json file as a JSON object, let's use the asset manager's getObject method and simply pass the file name into it. And the other one is our locale variable. Next, we need to pass this localization variable into the UI Builder class as the 4th parameter. And when we call UI Builder's load method, it will automatically localize the texts. Now, this is enough if we only want to localize the texts based on the device language code at the app launch. But in our app, we have also given the option to change the language in the lobby state, so we need to handle that as well. This is where we are going to use the setter function of the locale variable. So, when the user opts to change the language, we also need to set the localization variable's locale property with the changed value. I think this is a good point to put a pause on our current work in the game class so that we can get back to the language pop-up class and finish off what we left out there earlier. Just to recap, we tested the select language pop-up and each button printed its name when clicked. In our strings.json file, we used EN for English, FR for French, and DE for German. Please note, these are standard ISO language codes used across devices. So instead of using full language names, let's replace the button names with these two-letter codes. This way, when a button is clicked, we can directly assign its name to the locale variable. Open Starling Builder and let's update the button names accordingly. Now, back in VS Code, let's set the locale value using the button name. So, upon clicking a button, the flow should be like, the pop-up should immediately close, and the text should update to the selected language. To close the pop-up, let's dispatch a triggered event on the close button, and its listener will call the onClose function. Okay, we're done with the language pop-up class. Let's return to the game class and continue from where we left off. Before we move any further, let me explain a few things. So we know that the option to change the language is available only in the lobby state. That means whenever the user switches the language, we only need to update the text in the lobby state. And we don't have to worry about the race state because there's no option to change the language there. So, in short, we need to make a couple of changes inside the lobby state. First, we will set up a variable to hold all the texts displayed in the lobby state. Next, we will create a public function to update those texts whenever the language is changed, and call it from this setter function of the locale variable in the game class. So, let's go to the lobby state. We need to make a few changes here. The UI Builder class has another method called load, which is similar to the create method, but instead of just returning the display object, it returns the entire UI data, including the associated metadata, as an object. So let's create a local variable called UI_data and call the UI Builder's load method. Its parameters will be the same as those of the create method. Next, to get the display object, simply assign UI_data.object as a sprite to main_sprite. Now, to access the associated metadata, which contains all the texts and their corresponding localization information that we set earlier in the Starling Builder editor. Let's first declare a variable, UI_params of type dictionary, and then assign UI_data.params to UI_params. Now, to update all the texts whenever the language changes, let's create a public function called localize. Inside this function, let's call the UI Builder's localize texts method, which takes two parameters, a display object that contains all the texts and a dictionary that contains all the associated metadata, which in our case should be main_sprite and UI_params. Now, back in the game class, all we need to do is, here in the setter function, we can consider the current underscore state always of type lobby. That's because we already know that the user can only change the language while in the lobby. And that too, only using the select language pop-up, which means there is no other place in the game or in the code where the locale variable's value can be set. So here, let's call the localize method of the lobby state to update all the texts. To be safe, let's also do a null check before calling the localize method. So that's it. Let's now test it and see how it works in the game. So, the default device language is English. Now, let's try changing it to French. Let's try German now. There is an issue with the best score text. The score is missing. Seems like we need to handle the best score text separately. Inside the race state, it's working. The Game Over pop-up is working fine too. Alright, now let's fix the best score text. Now, there are a couple of issues with the best score text. One is that we are hard-coding the label, which is not recommended when using localization, and the other one is that, after localizing, we are not appending the score value to the best score text. So, let's fix both. So, we don't need this hard-coded text here, because the same text is already defined in the layout, and when the lobby loads, the text will already be localized, so we just have to append the score to it. And now, we should do the same thing inside the localized function right after calling the localized texts method. Or, just for the learning purpose, let me show you another way to handle this, which might come in handy in a different scenario. So the thing is, we can fetch a localized text directly from the UI Builder's localization property by simply passing the localized key, in this case, text_02. And then, append the best score value to it. Now, let's test it. Alright, so the best score text issue is now fixed. Now, what if our default device language is not English? Let's test that scenario once. To test that, let's comment out this line and instead, return French as the device language. Let's test that. See, it automatically localized all the text to French. Now, let's try the same for German. Hang on. Seems like we missed this text. Can't we localize it? We can, right? Let's do it. So let's open the strings.json file and add the 15th text. Let's add its translations. Now let's go to the Leaderboard item renderer class. And here, inside this if condition, let's add. And get the localized text of key text_15. Alright, now let's test. So, that's complete now. And before we move on, let me quickly show you an issue that you might face with leaderboards when number of entries is high. So, in the Leaderboard pop-up class, let's add more scores to the array. Duplicates are fine for this test, so let's just copy-paste. And let's test. Now, as we scroll, you will notice something. Multiple entries are highlighted, where only the current player's entry should be highlighted. This happens because, in a list component, item renderers are supposed to be reused for better performance. So, to fix this issue, all we have to do is add an else condition here in the item renderer class and handle the else case accordingly. This means we need to reset both the name text and score text colors back to the default values which were set in the editor. Let's copy this color for the name text. And this one for the score text. Let's test again. Perfect. Now only the current player's entry is correctly highlighted. Now, let's get back to the game class where we were testing the localization with the default device language. And we learned that if the device language is supported with localization, then the game automatically loads in that language. But what if the device language is not supported? Let's say it's in Spanish or Portuguese, for which we don't have localization right now. Then, let's test that scenario once and see what happens. Let's set it as Portuguese and test it. So, we can see that instead of the default texts, the localized keys are being displayed. And we definitely don't want that to happen. So, to fix this issue, let's first create an array and name it Supported Locales. And add all the supported languages to it. Now, in the getter function of the locale variable, let's check if device's default language exists in the supported locales array. If true, then proceed with that language. And if false, then we need to pick a fallback language. Since we used English for all the texts in the editor while designing the layouts, let's use English as the fallback. Also, I won't be able to test the else condition because my device's default language is English. So, to test this scenario, I need to try the Portuguese example again. Similarly, your device's default language might be different, so make changes accordingly. Also, let's add a trace statement here, just to confirm that our code is working. Now, let's test. As expected, English was picked correctly. And here in the debug console, we can see locale not found. So, let's revert that change. And we can remove this trace statement as well. Also, in the Leaderboard pop-up class, we can remove the duplicate entries from the Leaderboard array. Now, let's test the build one more time. So, we're almost done with the localization implementation. And the only thing left now is adding the missing characters into our bitmap font. Just keep in mind, if you're going to support multiple languages, make sure the font you pick actually supports all the characters. Otherwise, you'll start seeing these kinds of warnings in the debug logs. Luckily, Our font already supports everything we need. So let's go ahead and add those characters to the bitmap font next. This is our saved bitmap font configuration. So let's open it up in the Snow bitmap font editor. Let's zoom in a little bit. Now let's switch back to VS Code and copy this missing character. And just paste it here. Immediately, we can see it appear in the editor. Next, let's export this and extract it to a folder. Then, copy and replace the files inside our textures folder. Do we have more missing characters? No, looks like we're good. So let's go ahead and test. Now we can see the character here. Let's check other texts as well. Now let's check for German. If you're not familiar with the language, it's actually quite difficult to notice which characters are missing. That's why we have to rely on the debug console. There's really no other way to catch the missing characters. Let's check the debug console. There you go. We have one more missing character. So let's copy the text and follow the same steps again. There you go again, the missing character. What? 2 more missing characters? Seems like it's from German. Again, let's repeat the same steps. Before that, let's first clean up this folder. And let's copy the other one as well. Here it is. Both of the missing characters came from the same select language pop-up. And hopefully, those were the last ones remaining. Let's once check the strings.json file just to make sure we have covered all the missing characters. This one we have included. This one too. And yes, so we have included all the 4 missing characters. So let's save this configuration. And let's replace it with the previous one. All right, we are almost at the finish line with our game. And I can already hear you thinking, hey, how did we even make a Flash game without using a single movie clip? It's not like we built a vintage text-based game, right? There's a lot of movement going on, and we even have a cinematic blast in it. So, how on earth did we pull it off? That, my friend, is the magic of Starling Framework. And I'll be real honest, our game actually doesn't need a movie clip. But I don't want you to leave without knowing how they work. Because someday, you might want to convert your Flash games to Starling, or even want to start a new project in it. And not knowing much about movie clips would be a real bummer. So don't worry, our Starling bird is waiting to flap its wings. So roll up your sleeves even further, and let's learn how to bring a movie clip to life in Starling. Open Starling Builder and load the lobby layout. First, let's add a text field into the center layout. Now, from the strings.json file, let's find out its localized key. Let's enable these 2 properties. Now, from the Comment tab, let's add starling.display.movieclip. Click on the drop-down and select bird_01. Let's remove the digits and keep the prefix as bird_. Click OK to load the movie clip. To preview the animation, just click Play here at the bottom. Now, let's rename the movie clip to _bird_MC. Save the layout, and let's get back to VS Code. Oops, I forgot to make one change. In the lobby state, let's declare a variable, _bird_MC of type movie clip. And it should be Starling's movie clip, not Flash's. The only difference is, in Starling, to animate a movie clip, we will have to add it to Starling's juggler, like this. By default, every movie clip's loop property will be true, and it will animate indefinitely. To play it only once, we have to set its loop property to false. You can see that the movie clip just played once and stopped. And if we want to take any action after the movie clip has played once, then we have to add an event listener. It will be event.complete. Let's add a trace statement here. Now, in the debug console, we can see bird movie clip complete. But what if we want the movie clip to play 5 times and then stop? All we need is a counter. First, let's declare a variable. We can remove this line because we want the movie clip to loop. Each time the movie clip completes a cycle, we'll increment the counter. And if the counter reaches 5, we stop the movie clip. To stop a movie clip, we can either remove it from the juggler or call its stop method. Please note that, besides stop, the movie clip class also has pause and play methods. Finally, put the trace statement inside the if condition to see when it stops. There you go, it stopped. Let's check the statement in the debug console. And that's it for the introduction to movie clips in Starling. Now let's safely remove all of these code and keep only what's required for our project. Let's test it for one last time and see if everything is working as expected. Next, how about we add a smoke trail particle effect for our player car? Wouldn't that be nice? Let's open the Stardust editor. And from the examples section, let's load rocket plus smoke trail. There are 2 emitters in this particle effect, but we only need one, the smoke trail. So, let's remove this emitter, which is for the rocket. And make the smoke trail active. We will have to tweak the color curve, but before that, in the Actions section, let's add a gravity acceleration field. And increase the Y gravity. We can also tweak the color of the smoke. let's reduce the lifespan. The trail is too long, right? After all, ours is a car, not a rocket. Looks good for now, so let's save it. And rename it to Smoke. Close the editor and let's open VS Code. First, let's add the smoke particle effect into the asset manager. Next, let's create a new class. And copy-paste the whole code from the Blazing Fire class. And let's rename things accordingly. Now, in the race state, let's declare a new variable for the smoke particle. And instantiate it in the start race function. We also need to add it to the main layout. Now, in the update function, let's set the smoke particle's XY position so it matches the player car. This way, it will look like a realistic exhaust trail, and when the car shifts lanes, it will move along with it. And when a collision takes place, it should be removed from the stage. Let's once test and see how it looks. We can see that the smoke particle is correctly placed at the bottom right of the player car. But the only issue is, it's sitting on top of the player car when it should be below it. So, to fix this, here let's use the addChild method instead, and make sure it's always below the player car. Let's test. Now, everything looks perfect. How about a camera shake effect on collision? That would look awesome, right? Let's make it happen. First, let's head to the Starling forum. It's a dedicated space for the Starling Framework, where we can post issues and get help from the community. We can also search for existing topics and find discussions dating back to the early days of the framework. Let's search for camera shake. Here it is, exactly what we need. And guess what? It's the developer of the Starling Framework, Daniel. He himself has shared the solution. So, we'll copy this code into our project. Create a new class called Animations and paste it in. Before using it, there are a few steps to follow. It says, don't forget to call this in the project startup code. Let's copy that line and add it here, right at the beginning of the game class's constructor. Next, Let's copy the one-liner that will shake our camera 3 times in 0.3 seconds, with an amplitude of 5 in the X direction. And let's add it to the race state, right where the collision takes place. Now, we don't have a camera in Starling, so we'll shake the entire race state to get a similar effect. So, let's replace object with this. And let's test. Not bad, but let's make it shake a little more. Let's double the amplitude. Yes, now it looks perfect. So now we have added both the smoke trail particle effect and the camera shake effect. Pretty cool, right? And honestly, if we keep going like this, there's a whole world of stuff we could add to our game, like braking sounds, car honks, skid marks, bonus points for near misses, and the list goes on and on. But hey, this is a tutorial, not a blockbuster game we're making. So let's put a pause on our exploration and start wrapping things up. Throughout the tutorial, you might have noticed some blurry or jagged graphics, and the text fields lacked crispness. That's because we need to tweak a few settings. You might have also noticed some performance hiccups while debugging the builds, so we'll tackle that as well. So next, let me show you how to fine-tune those settings to make everything look sharper and run more smoothly. Let's open our main class, TurboShift, and here we have the Starling instance. We need to set its support high resolutions property to true, which is essential for creating crisp and properly scaled graphics on modern high-resolution displays. Next, in the application descriptor XML, we need to add requested display resolution and set its value to high. It actually tells the operating system to provide high-resolution display data. And there you go, everything is now in high resolution. Do you see the difference? The text is much crisper now, right? Just look at that draw call count. We definitely need to tackle this next. Now, let's first understand why we're seeing high draw calls in our game. A draw call is simply an instruction sent to the graphics card to render something. The fewer draw calls, the better the performance. It's that simple. Here's the key. Starling can only batch objects together if they share the same texture atlas. Think of Starling like a delivery truck that can only load and deliver items from one warehouse at a time. If everything you need is in that same warehouse, the truck makes a single efficient trip. But if some items are stored in another warehouse, the truck has to go back and make a separate trip. That's exactly what happens when Starling switches between textures. It creates extra draw calls. For example, when your sprites use one atlas and text fields use another, Starling has no choice but to make 2 trips to the GPU. First trip, render sprites with texture A. Second trip, render text with texture B. That's 2 draw calls, right? But if we include the bitmap fonts texture inside the main texture atlas, suddenly everything is in one place. Starling can now batch them together in a single trip, one efficient draw call for both sprites and text. So the fix is simple. Add your bitmap fonts texture to the main atlas. So let's open the texture packer file, and let's add the bitmap fonts texture into it. Now let's export it. Yes, it should replace the existing one. Now, back in VS Code. In the game class, this is our main texture atlas. And we can safely remove this bitmap fonts texture from the queue. And let's test. See, now the draw calls are low. Now, to really understand the difference, let's roll back the changes we just made and test again. Let's delete the bitmap fonts texture from it and export. So, when we open the leaderboard pop-up, the draw calls suddenly shoots up to 26. Now, let's add it back again. Now, once the bitmap font texture is part of the main atlas, the same leaderboard pop-up goes from 26 draw calls down to only 7. And finally, we got the game fully ready to ship. So congratulations! Before we wrap things up, let's play one round and go through all the features we have implemented, and from there, we will move on to building the AIR package. Hey, we got a new high score. So next, let's package our game as an AIR desktop application. For that, let's open this GitHub page and click on the link, Packaging an Adobe AIR Application. Here, we have AIR Desktop. Click on this link. Now, we need to specify the signing options in our ASConfig file. So, let's copy this portion and paste it inside the AIR Options section. First, let's rename our output file. Next, we need to specify the path to our certificate file. Before that, let's add the certificate file to our project folder. So, inside the project folder, let's add a new folder. Inside it, let's put the certificate file and set its path correctly. Next, we need to add icons. So let's copy this portion of the code and paste it here. Oh, we already have a file section. So let's copy only this part and add it here. Now we need to add these icons to our project folder. So again, let's add a new folder, name it Icons, and add the icons to it. If there are more icons, then we need to mention it here accordingly. Now, we are all set to package the app. And all we have to do is go to the terminal, then select Run Task. Now, select the folder, ActionScript, and then select Package Release Desktop Application, Shared Runtime. Here we have to enter the password of our certificate and press Enter. That's interesting. We got an error. Timestamp response not valid, huh? What does that even mean? Let's copy that and search for it in the AIR SDK's GitHub page. There is a dedicated repo, Adobe Runtime Support. Click on Issues. Then, let's search for the error. Look, somebody has already reported it. Let's go through it once. So we need to make a small change in our AS config file. Just add TSA with a value of none. Sometimes this could be a temporary issue, so if it builds without this change, you can go ahead and skip it. All right, let's try to build again. Enter the password again. And congratulations, build generated successfully. Let's check for the same in the bin folder. Here it is, turboshift.air. Let's install and see it in action. Oh, we forgot to disable the stats and the icons did not load as well. Let's fix that. So, the reason why the icons didn't load and we saw a generic default system icon instead is because we forgot to reference their names in the application descriptor. We need to add an icon section to our application descriptor and specify the file names of the icon files for different sizes. Next, let's increment the patch version from 0 to 1. Please note that it's a good practice to update the app version even if we make a minor change in the application descriptor. Next, let's disable the stats in the main class. That's it. Now let's build again. Let's enter the password. And the update build is successfully generated. Let's install and see if the version is updated or not. And the version to be installed is 1.0.1. The stats are gone and the app icons are showing up correctly. So, that's it. Our tutorial is now complete. If this helped you out, please hit that subscribe button and let me know what you think in the comments. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments section. I would love to help. And remember, we're not done yet. Part 3 is coming soon, where I will walk you through converting this ActionScript project to a Hacks project and creating a HTML5 build. Till then, bye-bye, take care. And thanks for watching.